Playing video games is what I like to do by myself. I don't have to be around the other kids. So all they want to do is pick on me.
Jaden's commercial is part of a massive anti-obesity campaign in Georgia. 1 million children in that state are overweight. Research reveals that 75% of their parents don't recognize it as a problem. The ads have generated controversy, just as these billboards did months ago, as they put fat kids, their families, and maybe an entire state in a position of being mocked. Here's the ad about Tamika.
Being thick runs in our family. As her mom, I never noticed Tamika eating any differently than the rest of us. She likes junk food, but what kid doesn't?
The SHAPE Act, passed by Georgia lawmakers, requires some children to be weighed and measured. The results reported to parents and the state. Question is, will this $50 million push help solve the obesity epidemic, or is the focus on the wrong thing?
When the doctor said she had type 2 diabetes, I never thought what we eat made her sick. I just always thought she was thick like her mama.
Obviously well-intentioned these ads are, but do they help anyone? We have three guests who have something to say about this. Bob Greene, he was a frequent contributor to the Oprah Winfrey Show. He's the author of The Life You Want. He is joining me via Skype. Steve Perry, CNN education contributor, and Mark Wolcon, he is the represents the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, the organization behind the ad campaign. Mark, first you, I watched these ads and I'm not sure what we should be learning from them. What do you think?
Well, you said it earlier that 75% of these kids' parents don't know that they're obese. So the intent of this ad campaign is to raise awareness in Georgia, let them understand that we have a problem. We are number 2 in the nation with childhood obesity. That's a top 10 that we want to get out of. And the only way to get out of it is to first admit you have a problem. The process for any change begins with awareness and acceptance that there is a problem that needs to be solved.
Steve Perry, amongst all of us here, you're the one that's dealing with adolescents and young people on a day-in, day-out basis. You've seen a little bit of these ads. You saw the clips we just played. Do you think it's going to have the intended effect?
I hope so. I remember when I was in middle school, the campaign was about trying to get kids to not smoke. So they showed us the lung of a smoker in class, and it frightened us. Obesity is a lethal disease that is curable, and especially when I go to visit schools in the South, I see some pretty large children who I don't think the parents really see them as large. I think the parents accept that they are just built that way. And many times you'll hear parents say they're just big boned. Well, they're no big skeletons. They're big meat on those bones, and they need to see that.
Dr. Wolcon, is it just an issue of how kids are eating and what's going on at the dinner table, or the fact that there is no longer a family dinner table?
Well, it's multifactorial. You know, if you look at the obesity epidemic, it started in the 80s. There's a genetic component. There are some people and some groups that are more predisposed to becoming overweight. But it's really a cultural milieu that we live in. And right now, the culture here in Georgia and throughout the nation is such that we have a terrible obesity epidemic that is leading to health problems in kids that we used to only see in adults. I'm a pediatric surgeon and the surgeon-in-chief at Children's. And, you know, we see these kids every day. And we see high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, again, diseases that you only saw in adults and kids. We need to do something about this.
Now, Bob Greene, this is something you've been addressing for quite some time. How do you see all this?
Well, I think no question something needs to be done. The health consequences are dire. However, I look at someone struggling, in particular a child, with their weight. It's never about just they're eating too much. There's almost always issues behind it. And the root of this is usually the way the child feels about themselves. So in some ways, to put a spotlight on that child may be a disservice, quite honestly. It's going a level deeper. If the child is insecure about their life or anything going on in their life, to have some public ridicule or the potential for that only inflames the situation.
Well, Bob, I want to dig into that a little bit, because I'll let my other guests ring in just a second, but I first want to dig in with you, Bob. And because this is something I see all the time. Obviously, I deal with a population that's been highly traumatized. And think of this from an evolutionary perspective. From an evolutionary perspective, if there is trauma to a young animal or a young human, it makes sense if a human is entering a traumatic environment that they would want to quickly accumulate as much calories as they could, with the sort of adaptive idea that this is a hard thing to explain, but the idea that the environment may not allow them to eat in the future because it's a very dangerous, traumatizing environment. The problem is that after trauma in our culture, they enter an environment where there's nothing but gratifying, fatty, fast foods, and so obesity ensues. And then obesity becomes a strategy for keeping people away. If you're a trauma survivor, you kind of want people at a distance. Do you find that too, Bob?
I really have to agree with that. And there are all levels of trauma. Even, say, a parent or a teacher who says, why did you get a C on your report card? Why are you wearing that? Why are you wearing your hair that way? That actually, over time, reinforces the fact that you're unworthy of certain things, happiness, to be a certain size. And these are the problems that are very subtle. And you take that all the way up to, say, a situation where a child has experienced abuse. You're upping the odds that there's going to be a coping mechanism. And that's either drugs, that's either alcohol, and most common would be food. It's a subtle kind of way to say, I'm okay, I feel good about myself, and it tends to be more socially acceptable than alcohol or drugs.
And this was the sort of light that went on in Oprah's head under your guidance, in her head, is it not? She understood that she started eating for emotional reasons. Is that accurate, Bob?
Yeah, she'll be the first to tell you that eating can be part of a coping mechanism when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're bored, when you're stressed. It's the easiest one, and you're not necessarily hurting anyone else. But again, we know it's a subtle way. It has a very similar health consequences. They may not be as immediate as someone addicted to drugs or alcohol, but they're significant.
I'll turn to my other guests now. We're going to have a whole other segment after the break with you guys, but who wants to ring on this, Steve or Dr. Wolcott?
Well,
Steve.
I think that for sure, some obesity is, of course, a symptom of other things. But in many cases, it is the result of a family's eating style and the inactivity of a child. I think that schools have had the traditional gym class in which you have to take a certain amount of hours per week in order to fulfill your gym requirement. When we look at some of the prep schools, what we see is they don't have traditional gym. What they have is that the children have to participate in 2 varsity sports, which can get them up to 2,000 hours of physical activity, which more importantly builds a healthy child and, as you know, builds muscle memory. So you don't have to worry about eating as much as another child does because you're constantly in season. You build better eating habits and you create in the child the opportunity for them to see themselves as an athlete and improve their self-esteem.
Steve, well said. I think the point is this is a complicated, multifactorial issue.